Divine Oracle, Unwritten Words Behind My Novel. The Historical Blueprint of a Great Argead Saga, ALEXEIN. Volume 1, Telesias, The War Dance. By Makāula Nakae. Audio Essay. Episode 25, General Attalus, the Young Court Titan. Welcome back to Divine Oracle, Unwritten Words Behind My Novel. I am Makāula Nakae. Today, we dive into a fascinating historical puzzle that directly impacts the narrative architecture of ALEXEIN. We are untangling a severe case of historical double vision, separating a seasoned mountain warlord from the famous court titan who shares his name. We are stepping right into the heart of the 360s BCE to profile the volatile, fiercely proud mind of young Attalus. General Attalus, the veteran of the transition, circa 390 to 359 to BCE. 1. What do we know about young General Attalus? Before the emergence of his younger, more politically explosive relative, Attalus, the uncle of Cleopatra, Philip II's final bride, classical history records an older, foundational military figure who bridged the transition between the reigns of Amyntas III, Alexander II, Perdiccas III, and the early years of Philip II. Unlike the younger Attalus, whose arrogance and court intrigue ultimately led to his assassination by order of Alexander the Great, this older General Attalus was a hardened institutional veteran of the upper cantons. He represented the generation of frontier commanders who spent decades holding the bloody northern borders against Illyrian and Thracian incursions before the structural reforms of the mid-4th century BCE took root. 2. The Athenian writer version. Athenian orators and writers such as Demosthenes and his contemporaries rarely distinguished between the older Macedonian field commanders. To Athens, any high-ranking Macedonian general operating near the Thermaic Gulf or Amphipolis was viewed through the hostile lens of imperial encroachment. Athenian political rhetoric painted these veteran officers as aggressive regional agents enforcing Argead hegemony. In Athenian diplomatic archives, elite generals like Attalus were frequently characterized as stubborn obstacles to Athenian maritime trade, embodying the unrelenting military pressure that eventually forced Greece into submission at Chaeronea. 3. Other historical writers, Diodorus Siculus, Justin, and Plutarch. Classical biographers and historians treat the elder Attalus as a critical witness and operational pillar during the darkest decades of Argead instability. Diodorus Siculus highlights the role of veteran commanders during the turbulent transitions following the assassinations and regencies of the 360s BCE, noting how senior officers maintained field cohesion while the central court at Pella was paralyzed by internal power struggles. Justin frequently attributes tactical movements during the reigns of Amyntas III and Perdiccas III to veteran officers who kept the kingdom from fracturing entirely under the weight of civil war. Plutarch emphasizes the deep generational divide within the Macedonian high command, contrasting the old guard discipline of veteran generals like Attalus and Parmenion with the volatile, high-stakes gambles of younger rulers like Alexander. 4. Modern historian perspectives and archaeological findings. Modern classical scholarship and epigraphic findings paint the older general as part of an indispensable institutional core. Epigraphic evidence from Upper Macedonia demonstrates that noble families like Attalus's held vast regional sway, functioning almost as semi-autonomous regional lords whose allegiance the central Argead crown had to continually negotiate. Historians point out that Philip II and his predecessor Perdiccas III could never have launched their sweeping military and administrative reforms without relying on these veteran commanders to anchor the traditional infantry and cavalry while new tactical units, pis heteroi, were being trained. The 368 BCE crisis, Attalus's chronological blueprint. In the historical framework of the ALEXEIN saga, Attalus, the future general and uncle to Philip II's final queen, Cleopatra Eurydice, was born around 390 BCE. In the dark, volatile crisis of 368 BCE, he is roughly 22 years old, a fiercely ambitious young aristocratic squire of the lowland nobility. Unlike older institutional preservationists like Antipater or the strategic border shield of Parmenion, young Attalus represents the raw, fiercely protective, and deeply entitled pride of the native Macedonian aristocracy. Step 1. The blood on the dance floor, the assassination. The event, King Alexander II, is brutally murdered by Ptolemy of Aluros during a festive war dance. Young Attalus' action, the defensive guard of the lowland noble enclaves. Immediately after the assassination, as Pella erupts into panic, young Attalus does not flee, nor does he rally to Ptolemy. Believing that a coup by an upcountry faction threatens the hereditary lands of the lowland aristocracy, Attalus acts on pure class survival. He aggressively rounds up his family's armed estate retainers, personal squires, and close noble peers, locking down the aristocratic estates surrounding Pella to protect his lineage from targeted purges, while the palace runs red. Step 2. The shockwave and the border panic before foreign armies arrive. The event, the western frontiers destabilize under King Bardalus's massing Illyrians. The pretender Pausanias invades from the east. Young Attalus' action, the arrogant refusal of the regional barbarian levy. During the initial panic and funeral period, when the usurper Ptolemy of Aluros tries to issue an emergency summons to the regional levies to march to the frontiers, young Attalus showcases his lifelong aristocratic defiance. He openly refuses to subject his family's personal horsemen and elite foot retainers to the command of a regicide rogue, arguing that throwing unintegrated, panicked levies into the path of Bardalus's heavy infantry squares is tactical suicide. His stubborn insubordination inadvertently forces Ptolemy to look elsewhere for military solutions. Step 3. The Queen Mother's desperate plea, the Athenian intervention. The event, the pretender Pausanias marches on Pella. Queen Eurydice begs the Athenian general Iphicrates for aid, who promptly drives Pausanias out. Young Attalus' action, securing the capital alongside the regent and Antipater. During the Athenian intervention, while professional Athenian heavy hoplites and allied forces move to confront Pausanias near the Haliacmon River, young Attalus remains inside Pella. Alongside the regent and Antipater, he helps guard the capital, maintaining internal security and protecting the vulnerable Argead heartland, while the external threat is beaten back. Step 4. The southern titan steps in, Pelopidas comes to Pella. The event, left-wing factions call upon Thebes. General Pelopidas marches north to arbitrate and confirms Ptolemy as regent. Young Attalus' action, the arrogant courtly defiance of Theban arbitration. During Pelopidas's arrival and the arbitration at Pella, as the legendary Pelopidas dictates terms inside the royal court, Attalus is forced to witness the total humiliation of his country. While Antipater uses cold diplomacy to keep the peace, the hot-headed Attalus can barely contain his contempt for the southern Greek arbiters. He refuses to bow or show deference to the Theban delegates, establishing his narrative identity as a strict Macedonian purista psychological trait that will heavily define him decades later when he aggressively demands a native, unalloyed Argead heir. Step 5. The bond of peace after hostages are sent to Thebes. The event, Pelopidas extracts 30 noble boys, 68 in the ALEXEIN narrative, including the teenage Philip II, and marches back to Thebes. Young Attalus' action, factional consolidation, and bitter vows at the hearth. During and after, the hostages are sent south. Because Attalus is already in his early 20s, he is too old to be taken in Pelopidas's draft of noble hostages. However, watching his younger peers and a prince of the blood dragged away in chains leaves a bitter, permanent scar on his psyche. With the generation directly below him entirely hollowed out, young Attalus steps into a massive power vacuum in Pella, aggressively courting older noble connections, and vowing that Macedonia will never again bow to a foreign shield. Chronological breakdown of Perdiccas III's reign, 365 to 359 to BCE. 365 BCE, the coup and accession. The teenage Prince Perdiccas III reaches the legal age of majority, eliminates the regent Ptolemy of Aluros in a clinical counterpurge, and claims the executive Argead crown. Veteran commanders realign behind the young king, stabilizing the central government. 364 to 363 BCE, internal restructuring and intellectual Pella. Perdiccas begins structural military and administrative reforms, welcoming philosophers like Euphrates of Orius into his court to instill a rigorous framework of statecraft, while relying on the old guard to secure domestic stability. 362-360 BCE, frontier stabilization. The king, alongside senior generals, undertakes campaigns to secure contested borderlands against northern tribes, repairing relationships with regional nobility and rebuilding the treasury. 359 BCE, the Argead Valley disaster and the passing of the Old Guard. Perdiccas III marches the core Macedonian army into the Argead Valley to confront the Illyrian king Attalus in a massive pitched battle. The engagement ends in absolute catastrophe. Perdiccas III and 4,000 elite troops are slaughtered on the field. This battle marks the final chapter for veteran commanders of the older generation, leaving the shattered remnants of the state to be picked up by surviving generals and a newly elevated Philip II. The psychology of young Attalus, arrogance, ambition, and friction. It is completely understandable why young Attalus feels so frustratingly difficult to pin down. When you look at his trajectory from his early days under Perdiccas III all the way to his explosive downfall just after the assassination of Philip II, his behavior often feels like a messy blend of arrogance, self-absorption, and baffling hostility. It really does read like ancient Athenian propaganda mixed with a heavy dose of soap opera drama. But when we strip away the dramatic flair of the classical sources, his psychology starts to make sense through the lens of pure, unadulterated court ambition. Was he jealous of Philip? Absolutely. Young Attalus was a high-ranking nobleman, deeply embedded in the elite Pella social structure. As Philip rose from a hostage in Thebes to an absolute military and political titan, transforming Macedon into a global superpower, Attalus found himself perpetually playing second fiddle to a king who completely overshadowed every traditional noble family. His hostility wasn't necessarily a blind hatred of everything Philip did. Rather, it was the bitter resentment of an elite aristocrat who watched his own traditional power and autonomy get swallowed up by an absolute monarch. That underlying friction ultimately boiled over at Philip's final wedding feast, when Attalus drunkenly questioned Alexander's legitimacy. A fatal miscalculation that proved his arrogance finally outgrew his usefulness to the Argead crown. Tune in for our next daily drop tomorrow as we continue to dissect the bloodlines of antiquity. ALEXEIN, a great Argead saga. Volume 1, Telesias, the War Dance. Unearth the ultimate historical drama. We are releasing a brand new episode every single day until the epic conclusion of Volume 1. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 15 to 45-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, the perfect daily plunge into the ancient world. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Telesias playlist. Volume 2, Sacred Band playlist, and bookmark Divine Oracle, Volume 1 playlist. Subscribe to follow the rise of the Argead dynasty. Comment below. When young Attalus navigated the treacherous factional politics of Pella, defying regents, guarding noble estates, and ultimately clashing with the absolute power of the Argead crown, do you view his fiery, uncompromising aristocratic pride as a fierce defense of native Macedonian tradition, or was he a self-absorbed court titan whose blinding arrogance sealed his own destruction? Let me know your structural breakdowns in the comments below.